tal? Muy buenas tardes amigos de DVB Noticias. Los saluda como todos los días desde la ciudad de Londres, Pascual Raúl Zárate Gil. Antes de comenzar, los queremos invitar que entren a nuestro portal de noticias dbbnoticias.com, un portal que tiene propósito único de mantenerlos bien informados de los distintos acontecimientos locales, federales e internacionales, así como esta cápsula que es diaria. Y bueno, como todos los viernes tenemos a nuestro invitado de lujo, al doctor Werner Voigt, el cual para nosotros es un privilegio contar con él. Y solamente recordando un poco una reseña, el doctor Werner Voigt, y vamos a cambiar porque el día de hoy es en inglés. Dr. Werner Voigt, he is a U.S. qualified lawyer who is also uh, the only U.S. qualified lawyer in our city, in our state of Puebla. He also has been practicing for a number of years in the US in some of the best law firms, as well as teaching in UPAEP and even also in Germany. Let's not forget about that he has a PhD in Islamic law by the University of Cairo. And as every Friday, we would like to thank you so much, Dr. Werner Voigt, for bringing to us some of his very interesting and very comprehensive analysis of any different topics that are happening. For the last few weeks, almost a month if I'm not wrong, there has been a new conflict that has been emerging and increasing the crisis not only in the region but all around the world. I'm talking about the war that is happening mainly between Iran, the US, and Israel. Therefore, today Dr. Werner Voigt will talk about the latest news, but mainly about what the war with Iran has become Donald Trump's most serious dilemma, and can Mexico benefit from this situation? Dr. Werner Voigt, good afternoon.
A very good afternoon, and we need to start off today by remembering that exactly today this war has lasted 3 weeks already. And yesterday afternoon, the Pentagon, the Secretaría de Defensa, as we would say in Spanish, in Washington, has asked the White House to approve a request to Congress for more than $200 billion to fund the war against Iran. If approved, the funding of this $200 billion astronomical amount would go well beyond the cost of the current campaign. Much of it would be used to rapidly replenish and expand production of key weapon systems that have been heavily used in the past 3 weeks in a campaign carried out by U.S. forces and Israeli forces. Now, at present, the United States is spending approximately $1 billion a day on munitions and arms systems. That means that Trump seems to now be planning to continue this war until the end of this year. Because if we continue to spend at the rate of $1 billion a day, this new amount that he wants would mean 200 more days of vicious combat in Iran. Now, after 3 weeks of the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump faces a critical moment. The conflict has quickly escalated into a regional confrontation with military, economic, political, and personal factors intertwined. In Washington, the focus is now redirected from seeking a quick victory to avoiding a long, costly war. There is no clear operational plan that Donald Trump has to achieve specific objectives in this war. Instead, goals remain open-ended and totally uncoordinated. Early assumptions that the Trump administration had have all failed, and decisions are now made on a day-by-day basis, responding to unfolding developments without any defined end in sight, and rising complexity of this conflict makes it difficult for Trump, who launched the war to end it based on results so far, when are falling far short of declared ambitions. The mounting cost further undermines justification for continued fighting, quite frankly. Two main paths, I should say, appear to be emerging. Now, the first path is continued military escalation to achieve U.S. and Israeli objectives. That carries risks, though. The conflict is guaranteed to widen. U.S. forces face greater pressure, and economic and political costs could mount at home and abroad. Support from some allies could also disappear. The second path is a gradual U.S. withdrawal framed as a victory. This would limit immediate costs for Washington, but raises challenges for the credibility of Donald Trump's government, quite frankly. And it would have a devastating impact on America's international influence. It will allow Iran to emerge resilient, in addition to giving it room to rebuild nuclear and missile capabilities and restore regional influence, which would likely rebound once the regime survives this war. Now, as we said in our program 2 weeks ago, a key development in the conflict is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Iran has leveraged its geographic position to disrupt global trade, causing major oil, gas, and fertilizer supply disruptions. Despite U.S. statements downplaying now the impact of all of this, Washington has asked international powers, including China, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and South Korea, to help secure navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, meaning that the crisis now is proven to exceed U.S. capabilities alone. And we should add to that all the nations that I just listed have said no to Donald Trump. They don't want to risk their soldiers' lives in a totally irrational war started by Donald Trump. Now, meanwhile, the stockpiles of enriched uranium in the city of Isfahan and add another layer of complexity. Their secure storage limits the effectiveness of airstrikes. These deposits of enriched uranium are in tunnel systems between 50 and 100 meters below ground. And that would make any ground operation by U.S. or Israeli soldiers extremely risky, extremely bloody. This helps explain the hesitation of Trump's government to take decisive action against these uranium storage areas while complicating any narrative of victory that Donald Trump might present us with. Amazingly, Iran has shown strong internal cohesion since the start of the war, despite vast military and economic losses. Indicators suggest, I think, adaptability by the Iranians and reorganization rather than decline, allowing Iran to maintain resilience. Now, efforts to stir internal dissent inside Iran have so far failed totally. No domestic dynamics have materially challenged the regime or weakened its grip. In fact, external confrontation appears to reinforce internal unity, complicating Donald Trump's calculations. Meanwhile, differences are emerging within the U.S.-Israeli camp. The U.S. favors containment, while Israel pushes for extermination of Iran. These divergent approaches create additional challenges for Trump. I think, based on these factors, several paths appear possible for the coming phase of the war. One is limited escalation over a short period, capped by a high-profile operation that would give Trump a political exit by simply declaring victory, followed by a gradual reduction of military presence in parallel with continued economic pressure. All options for such an operations are, however, very risky. Now, another path is targeted strikes on Iran's oil infrastructure, especially Kharg Island off the coast of Iran in the Persian Gulf. This would produce a direct economic impact without complex ground operations. But this carries the risk of Iranian retaliation that could also totally stop all exports of oil and other hydrocarbons from the Middle East. A third path, in my opinion, is an indirect negotiation channel, likely via China, for example, China wields influence with Iran and could allow both sides to exit the confrontation without a total loss of credibility, though Trump is unlikely, in my opinion, to adopt this path unless the costs of other options become simply unsustainable. In the long term, if the war does not end decisively, which to me seems likely, the conflict may shift to indirect attrition using economic, cyber, and security tools, while direct military operations decline. The war is trending toward redefining the rules of engagement rather than achieving a clear military victory. Trump's strategy aims to balance the avoidance of attrition with maintaining deterrence, especially as Iran has shown amazing resilience and maneuverability under pressure, even with the loss of its entire cadre of national leaders. They, the Iranians, have managed to successfully construct a mosaic of successors that are able to immediately step into the shoes of assassinated leaders. Now, ultimately, the next phase will not only shape the trajectory and outcome of the war, but also redraw regional and international balances with effects that will last for years and years. So then, U.S.-Israeli strikes killed Iran's leaders, but have not toppled the government, which now, from its perch on the Strait of Hormuz, has put the entire world economy in danger. The initial U.S. victory in killing the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, has given way to a conflict that Washington cannot completely control, sharply limiting President Trump's options. 3 weeks into this bloody war, Iran holds many cards as it chokes the world's oil supply and gas supplies and strikes U.S. allies in the Middle East, including Gulf states who had for years and years staked their reputations on political and economic stability. Now, the worldwide fallout has sparked questions over Donald Trump's strategy. Trump has called for Iran's unconditional surrender. This is a term used against Nazi Germany and imperialist Japan in World War II. And here, Iran is nowhere near a collapse, either militarily or politically, to make unconditional surrender its only option. They simply laugh at Donald Trump when he demands unconditional surrender. Now, there is a stark difference between the operational superiority that the U.S. has over Iran at this moment, they know, the Iranians know where everyone is and where to hit them. And the strategic understanding of Iran is, to my analysis at this moment, superior to that of Donald Trump. Now, the government of Iran has been struggling through U.S. sanctions for years and years, and was shaken by major demonstrations in December and January, sparking a security crackdown that resulted in the killing of tens of thousands of demonstrators. But with this brutality, the leadership of Iran has managed to maintain itself in power. Yet in the short term, Tehran still has plenty of pressure points. It can hit via oil and shipping threats, including via Yemen's Houthi rebels, who previously disrupted shipping through the Red Sea with their own missile attacks. Iran now is taking the global economy hostage as a means of putting enormous pressure on Donald Trump. All the while, Iranian missiles launched at U.S. allies in the Gulf region are eating up American interceptors, including the astronomically expensive Patriot and THAAD missile systems. And domestically, Trump now, who ordered the surprise strikes without seeking public support for the war or congressional authorization, as he is required to under the U.S. Constitution, Trump now is facing upcoming congressional elections. And now it appears increasingly that the Republican Party, Trump's party, will suffer a disastrous defeat. Now, as price-sensitive voters prepare to head to the polls, Republican representatives and Republican senators are calling the White House to tell Trump they risk losing their districts in these upcoming midterm elections. Now, in the midst of this mess created by Donald Trump, what about Mexico? The war in Iran may feel geographically really distant from Mexico, but in energy terms, it's much closer than it seems. Iran sits on one of the world's most strategic choke points, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow 2-kilometer wide corridor through which roughly 20 million barrels per day used to move in normal times, representing about a quarter of global seaborne oil trade. The strait is also a key route for liquefied natural gas exports from the Persian Gulf, because so much of the world's energy passes through this single passage. Any conflict that threatens it quickly becomes a global energy story, not just a Middle East one, and that involves Mexico as well. Now, members of our audience may ask, well, isn't there another way we can ship oil and liquefied natural gas from the gas fields and oil fields of the Persian Gulf over to the Red Sea? Well, the answer is yes. But tragically, there is only one pipeline that connects the Saudi Arabian oil and gas ports of Dhahran and Dammam via the capital of Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea port of Jeddah, and slightly to the north, a very modern port called Yanbu. The problem is, normal oil shipments need to be in the range of 20 million barrels a day, and the pipeline that I just referred to across Saudi Arabia can only manage to handle 4 million, not 20 million barrels per day. Well, now Mexico is both an oil producer and an energy importer, which puts us in a uniquely exposed position. Number one, imported fuels now are getting more and more expensive. Mexico imports most of its natural gas and a majority of its refined fuels primarily from the United States, and the United States is charging us world market prices. Right now, as we speak, the world market price of a barrel of oil is $107 per barrel. This is something we predicted 2 weeks ago when we said if Iran managed to effectively close traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, at that point oil would exceed a price of $100. And now we're at $107, and unnervingly, this morning, the government of Saudi Arabia warned that as far as the oil-producing and gas-producing nations of the Persian Gulf, and that includes Saudi Arabia, are concerned, by the end of this year, the price per barrel of oil could reach $185. That would spark an international recession. Now, when global crude prices spike during this Mideast war, U.S. refined products and gas prices are guaranteed to rise as well to the international level. Those higher prices are then passed through to Mexican buyers, from refiners and power generators to transport companies and ultimately us, the consumers. Now, domestic production does not fully protect Mexico. Being an oil producer helps, but it does not fully offset the impact of what's happening now. If prices rise, and rise sharply, Mexico may earn more from crude exports, but it still pays more for imported fuels and gas. And not only that, also chemical fertilizer for our agricultural industry, because fully 40% of all of the chemical fertilizer produced in the world comes from nations that border on the Persian Gulf. And right now, those factories have all been closed because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, for Mexico, the biggest macro risk is inflation, in my opinion. A sustained spike in oil prices can push up transport and food prices, squeezing households already dealing with much higher living costs, as we all know, and increase pressure on fuel subsidies of price controls, or price controls forcing the government to decide whether to protect the consumers or let prices adjust and risk, certainly, public anger. And it will complicate monetary policy as the Central Bank of Mexico weighs inflation risks against growth. In a worst-case scenario, I think, where Iranian exports are heavily disrupted, or this, and the Strait of Hormuz remains blocked, we will have a sharp and prolonged oil price spike with global inflationary consequences. Mexico would not be spared from that shock. Well, are there any strategic opportunities on the positive side for Mexico? Well, it's not all downside, I think. Periods of geopolitical tension can also open strategic doors, such as stronger roles as a reliable supplier to North America. We can certainly try to do that. If Middle Eastern supply looks riskier, the United States and Canada and other partners, frankly, may value stable regional producers more. Mexico can position itself as a key energy partner, especially if it improves regulatory certainty and infrastructure in deep water oil drilling. And here, again, we are paying the price of the short-sightedness of AMLO. López Obrador, our past president, canceled all international deep water oil drilling contracts, so that now we would have to start literally from zero to have deep water drilling success in the Gulf of Mexico. But I don't think we have any other chance. We need to develop more oil. And there is plenty in all of the parcels that international oil companies had already bid on to supply significantly more oil for Mexico and Mexico's export market. Now, Mexico can use this instrument to double down on number one, power grid modernization. Number two, renewable solar, wind, and geothermal generation capacity. Thirdly, energy efficiency in industry and buildings. And then number four, investment in storage and resilience, building more fuel and gas storage, diversifying import routes, and strengthening cross-border interconnections can reduce vulnerability to external shocks. To sum it all up then, what to watch for next? For Mexico's energy market, three indicators will be critical, in my opinion, in the coming weeks and months. Number one, Brent crude oil price trajectory. Are we seeing a short-lived spike or a sustained high price environment? After what we heard this morning from the Saudi government with the apocalyptic prediction of a price of $185 per barrel, we are definitely looking at a sustained high price environment. Now, number two, the Strait of Hormuz shipping conditions. Any actual disruption, by that I mean attacks, blockades, and insurance withdrawals, would be a really red flag. It would be catastrophic. And number three, policy responses in Mexico and in the United States. Here, decisions on strategic reserves, on subsidies, and energy investment will shape how hard the oil shock is likely to hit us this week. And now, the bottom line. The war in Iran is not just a distant geopolitical story, rather it is a direct and severe risk factor for Mexico's energy prices, for inflation and industrial competitiveness. How Mexico responds in terms of diversification, resilience, and regional cooperation will determine whether this crisis becomes purely a cost or becomes a catalyst for a stronger, more secure energy future for North America.
Absolutely, the crisis in the Middle East could represent a great opportunity for Mexico to reposition themselves in the energy and oil market as well, considering that Mexico has many reserves that could be explored that unfortunately previous administrations, as you have described, they eliminated or they put them on hold, or basically they terminated the agreements that they had with a number of oil national and private companies. Now, something else that we should become or consider is that the agreement with the U.S., the conversations that already started, and the dependency as well that we have from the U.S. may shift, and maybe also a card that we should consider at this administration from Claudia Sheinbaum to talk about or put on the table on the following months as part of this agreement as well. And in the meantime, also Donald Trump will be in a very delicate of weak position inside with this war because all the most of the governments at this stage they are not supporting the war with Iran, and internally the same. At some point there will be an exhausting process for the budget constraints, the military forces, and likely not going anywhere, as his main outcome, like you said, will evolve from a war into a different type of conflict with Iran in specific, and of course even the Middle East, the other impacted countries or cities as well in specific. They will have to start looking for other options, including asking the US to sit down to make a deal or stop the war, as this will continue affecting thousands of millions of dollars from these countries that they really highly depend in the oil and energy sector.
Exactly. And the basic problem that Donald Trump has is his stupid, aggressive arrogance of never consulting with anyone. He, a month ago, famously said, I consult with myself and no one else. And now we see what the consequences are. The American people overwhelmingly disapprove of this Iranian war. And even half of his Republican base does not agree with what he is doing. They basically say, we did not vote for this in the 2024 election, and they are emotionally ready to abandon him. And his advisors, and certainly all of the congressmen and the senators that are up for re-election in November, are shaking in their boots because they see that his intransigence, Trump's stubbornness, could spell the end of their political careers.
And that is a big problem, the big threat of Donald Trump, that he is the decision maker and very rational, basically only focused and based on his own irrational decision, stupidity, lack of governmental experience and skills, and then by the end he's just creating a mess not only in the Middle East, all around the world, in the markets, in the global markets, and any issue that he decides to create, he just opened a can of worms. And like you said, at least people inside the US, they are really overwhelmed of him. So it is only a matter of time until he leaves the White House and someone else, hopefully, with a better team, a better rationale, and more skills to govern the most important country of the world to find a better resolution, not only for the US, but for the global and international community.
Absolutely. At this point, we can only pray.
We can only pray and really hope that time will run faster so Donald Trump really soon will not be around with us in the near future.
I agree.
Dr. Werner Voigt, as always, would like to thank you once again. Thank you so much for this very interesting topic, how this is going to impact or maybe benefit Mexico if the administration is smart enough to start shifting and playing with their cards that they have. We would like to wish you a great weekend and hopefully speak to you next Friday.
Thank you, and same to you.
Pues amigos, como escucharon, un tema muy interesante lo que nos comenta el doctor Werner Voigt sobre el problema con Irán, la guerra y también el estrecho de Hormuz que está generando una crisis energética. El precio del barril está cerca de los $107. Incluso el Medio Oriente ha declarado que si esto no se concreta en los próximos meses, a final de año se estima que el precio del barril podrá alcanzar hasta los $180 por barril. Una locura, una crisis, una recesión, y México pues también se puede ver afectado, pero con las reservas y el petróleo, si el gobierno se pone las manos y pone inteligencia, podrán darle y virar ahora a México para ser uno de los proveedores. Por desgracia, pues lo rezagado que estamos se vería muy difícil, pero no descartar que esto puede ser una resolución a mediano y corto plazo. Como siempre, les queremos agradecer Antes de despedirnos, los invitamos como todos los días a que le den like, compartan, dejen sus comentarios y nos escuchamos la próxima semana con noticias frescas antes que los demás. Hasta la próxima.